thank you all for coming today. I know this means a lot to János, and it means a lot to me too. So the first act is János himself. He will read out the text that was already distributed to you, and then we're going to have some brief remarks from all of you, or many of you. Bob Solow, Francis Bator, Henry Rosovsky, Diane Griliches. Amartya Sen could not make it today. He's ill, but I have a very brief statement from him. Ben Friedman, Steve Marglin. Larry Summers has the flu and can't be here, but I have a statement from him. Philipe Aghion is on video, and then I will close. So let's get started.
Dear friends, I have to start with apologies. When I was teaching at Harvard, I self-evidently give all my talks freely without even look at my notes. Unfortunately, this time is over, and my English became somewhat rusty. It's better to read my talk. Please forgive me for that. Greetings from far away Budapest. I feel very touched by the mere idea that you have gathered to celebrate my 90th birthday. This occasion brings up so many memories. I can hardly tell you how much it meant to me that I could spend almost 2 decades in the United States, and not just anywhere in the States, but in one of the great academic centers of the world. Until the turning point, until 1989, I was one of the few members of the Eastern European intelligentsia who could travel to the West from time to time. Even before I obtained tenure at Harvard, I had taught at excellent European and American universities for shorter and longer periods. Still, it was immensely enriching for me to have the chance to commute regularly between Budapest and Cambridge, Massachusetts from 1984 to 2002. In other words, to spend half of my time in America. Now I really had an insight into what a living democracy means. And it was not only when I read books that I grasped it. Understanding also came as, together with my wife Zsuzsa, I watched the Watergate scandal unfold on screen. Today, these experiences are especially precious to me when here in Hungary, the current regime calls itself a democracy, where it systematically abolishes the most important fundamental institutions of democracy. My American experience sets the standards for me to develop my present views. My almost 2 decades of experience in America taught me what university autonomy and academic freedom really means. I still stand by these values, and now I find them badly needed. Let me give you an example. Recently, the time came up to appoint a new rector. In America, that would be a president for a distinguished Hungarian university. The university senate looked for a suitable nominee and found one. However, completely disregarding the university's choice, the government minister responsible for higher education appointed somebody else, following his own judgment. And he was able to do this because the law on higher education, altered in the spirit of autocracy, gave him the right. At Harvard, I was impressed by the meetings of the department's senior members and by the professional care as they considered every new professor's appointment. I was impressed, not least because I was able to compare all these with the selection procedures of Hungarian universities at that time. I make the same comparisons also today. Back then, selection was crude, did not check carefully the qualification of the candidates, and was strongly influenced by political considerations. Regretfully, these anomalies still prevail in many universities and many schools and departments. Even in the course of this friendly greeting, I do not wish to give the impression that my time in America was filled only with favorable experiences. As a tourist, I would have seen only America's natural beauties, its famous buildings, and its fantastically rich museums. But I lived there, and with my own eyes or through my readings, I perceived the misery of millions of people and the outrageous social inequality. I could read and listen to misleading declarations of politicians. I encountered ugly cases of corruption and violence. Nor I am left with only happy memories of the world of the university. I accepted my Harvard appointment on condition that I would spend half my time in Hungary, engaged in Hungarian academic and public life. I did not emigrate to the USA, also I was offered the opportunity. I would have wanted, and up to a point I was able, to act as a bridge between Eastern European and Western academic life. More than one, I was saddened by the lack of serious interest on the side of a large part of our colleagues towards the great transformation of the former communist world. What is more, there were some who specifically disapproved of my frequent absences from campus when I went away instead of taking on my share of the more mundane tasks of university life, committee work, long meetings, as other people did. But enough of that. I realize that I have been reciting the complaints to those who are the most innocent of these failings, to those who stood by my side and expressed strong interest in my experiences. I remember friends who are no longer with us: Abe and Rita Bergson, Frank and Matilda Holzman, Bobby Solow, Bob and Nancy Dorfman, and my dear assistant Madeleine Levasseur. I think back to the many fascinating conversations among colleagues and spouses in each other's homes, including the meetings with our best friends who are here today. I remember the interesting topics we discussed, the fine meals we shared, and the evenings we spent together in Boston's Symphony Hall or Jordan Hall. Thank you for gathering on this occasion. I look forward to enjoying the video recording of your words to me. It is natural for a man to look back over his long history on his 90th birthday. In this long film, the time I spent in the USA at Harvard counts as one of the most memorable, most exciting, and intellectually most enriching episodes. It is a rare and special pleasure to know that I formed real, selfless, and lasting friendships with people to whom I still faithfully attached, whom I still respect and still love.
So now it's our turn. János, I just wanted to let you know that in addition to the people you're about to hear from, Lauren LaRosa is with us this morning, and David Laibson. David is the current chair of the economics department, and the department is kindly hosting us here in Litauen this morning. But now let's have a few remarks, and Bob Solow is first on the list.
I have to begin with an irrelevancy, but János will appreciate it. It struck me when I walked in here that it was in September 1942 in this room that I first laid eyes on Barbara Lewis. The room didn't look like this. It was called the Litauen Lounge, and it was sort of furnished like a club. Am I not talking into the mic?
I think it's okay, but I'm just going to raise that a little bit.
Okay.
We'll get the last inch out of it.
So, and there was an informal non-credit seminar, and Bobby Lewis was sitting over there, and I was sitting over there, and I have to tell you that nothing so important has happened in this room ever since. Well, now, I first met János in the early 60s, maybe 1963. It was when the Kadar regime in Hungary first allowed dangerous people like János to travel abroad. And János came to Cambridge, and he stopped in to visit me in my office at MIT, maybe 1963, I don't know, but early 60s one way or the other. Now, I knew the name János Kornai because I had read one or two papers on two-level planning and maybe another article that he had written with the elusive Tamás Liptak, never seen afterwards. And so I knew who he was, but I had no idea what the person was like or about. And I suppose that János must have been in exactly the same position with respect to me. And something very remarkable happened in the course of that first conversation. Well, this will not make sense to János, perhaps, but it will to the people here. Everyone here who watches American television has come across a series of advertisements from the Chevrolet Motor Company in which people stand around admiring Chevrolet vehicles, and the advertisement informs you at the very beginning, these are real people, not actors, which implies immediately to us that those are actors, not real people. But with János, it was absolutely plain in 5 seconds, 10 seconds, that he was a real person and not an actor. It was, here are two strangers from very different social systems and all that, meeting for the first time, and we had an absolutely friendly, open conversation. We didn't talk technicalities. We wondered about the puzzle of Kadar. Kadar was, after all, just an apparatchik like the rest, but somehow he had decided to open up Hungary a little bit, to allow more travel to dissidents, known dissidents, like János, and I can't remember whether we thought we understood what was motivating Kadar, but we had this absolutely unconstrained conversation, and I think that when it was over, we were friends. And over the years, Bobby and I and János and Zsuzsa would be together occasionally, and it was always no one ever played a role. It was just a marvelous kind of friendship. We had music together. We both loved music, more than Bartok, but also Bartok, and it was it was a wonderful relationship. But I'm going to stop talking that way, and look, János and Zsuzsa know that we love them, and that I still love them, and I don't have to go on in that way. But I want to say something, carry on a conversation with János that had already begun. Over the last, I'll try to be quick about this, but it's interesting. Over the last months, our correspondence, email correspondence, has been largely about the deplorable political situation in Hungary and in the United States, and the conversion of Hungary into a kind of autocracy, and the beginnings of what looks like the end of democracy sometimes in the United States. And János has always insisted on the importance of the difference between a country whose democratic culture is superficial, like Hungary, and a country like the United States, where the notion of a democratic politics and a democratic society has long standing and goes very deep. And János, I want to contribute something puzzling to that conversation. I have been reading a book, a marvelous book, it goes back about 50 years, by Bernard Bailyn, a Harvard historian whom you might even have known when you were here. The book is called The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution. And it's a book about the ideas of the colonists in the U.S., in what became the U.S., in the states along the eastern seaboard, in the half century or so before the actual armed rebellion. And the astonishing thing, there's an enormous pamphlet literature that Bud Bailyn has read with great care. The astonishing and troubling thing is that those colonists sound like Trump supporters. They are forever talking about the incursion of the government on their liberty, on the fact that the government wants to lay its hands on their property, that the government wants to enslave them. They use that word frequently. The government they're talking about, of course, is the English government. It's the government of Walpole and Lord North. And what's more, and what's really astonishing, János, by the way, János, if you would like to read this book, I would gladly send you a copy. What's especially astonishing is the paranoia. The colonists, and these are dignified people like John Dickinson and even John Adams, the paranoia that they exhibit. Lord North bumbles from one damn thing to another, and the colonists think this is all part of a secret, long-standing conspiracy to encroach on their liberty, deprive them of their liberty, and turn them into slaves. And this gives, as Hercule Poirot used to say, it gives one furiously to think. And I want to talk about this over email with János over time to come. Now, there are important differences. Society was very different. There was no racism involved in the colonists. They weren't paying any attention to the Indians, made no difference to them. And more important, there is a sense in which the government in England, by the way, I forgot to mention, corruption. The word corruption appears on every page of their pamphlets and letters and speeches and sermons. But the government in England, of course, was exploiting them. It was levying taxes, and as far as I can tell, it wasn't providing any services for them other than the stationing of troops. And the existence of a standing army was the sure sign in their minds of impending tyranny. So, yeah, I'm looking at the people around here, János, but I'm really thinking about you. We have to talk about this, or write about it, and get straight exactly how to come to terms with the fact that it now appears to me that any old rancher in Idaho could, in fact, easily talk himself into thinking that he's a successor to Samuel Adams. And that's tough to think about. So, János, we've got to keep at this until we get to understand it fully. And remember, you can have a copy of Bud Balin's book anytime you want. Thanks. Happy birthday.
When I received Eric's invitation, I thought to myself, I won't have to spend much time on this because 10 years ago I gave an hour talk about János, I think on the occasion of his birthday, so I thought I'd just go back to my notes. It's a mistake. Reducing 10 pages of notes for an hour talk to something that'll satisfy Eric's constraint of 3-4 minutes turned out not to be entirely easy, but I think I've figured it out. In 1954, David Reisman in the Lonely Crowd, besides distinguishing between tradition-directed, inner-directed, other-directed people, he distinguished three individuals, and I'm not quite sure how this relates to the other category, three ideal types: the adjusted, the self-destructively unadjusted to the culture, he called them anomic, and last, the rarest of rare, the saving remnant, as he put it, the autonomous. He defined the autonomous as capable of choosing his goals and modulating the pace. For the autonomous, the goal, the drive towards them are rational, non-authoritarian, and non-competitive and non-compulsive. Now, I would like to read you from János's memoir, an excerpt. This is 1959, talking about himself and his own life. In daily life, in the socialist system, party secretaries and journalists, history teachers, planning office department like to imply there was no alternative. The only thing to do was what the historic forces of progress dictated. During the second half of the 1950s, the opposite idea came to me in many forms and from many sources. This is all János. It took me some 5 years, from 1954 to 1959, to work out how I wanted to live in the future. Through a series of conscious deliberations and improvisations intertwined with each other. At every moment, room for potential choice was narrowed by pressures from the outside world, but there was choice available at every moment. Nevertheless, in retrospect, by 1959, some of my basic decisions had already emerged. I'm reading from János's memoir. 1, I would break with the Communist Party. 2, I would not emigrate. 3, my vocation would be research, not politics. I would not indulge in heroic, illegal forms of struggle against the communist system. I wanted to contribute to renewal through my scholarly activity. 4, I would break with Marxism. 5, I would learn modern economics. I wanted my studies and researches to be a part of the Western profession of economics. These were, János continued, no vague or loose clusters of intentions, but a conscious, considered strategy in life. 45 years have passed, so 55. I do not claim to have followed them all without exception. People are frail. I tried to keep to them. If I erred, I would reproach myself later. I attach great value to the moral imperative of being true to oneself. I think if David Riesman were here, there can be no doubt that he thinks János Kornai a quintessentially autonomous man.
I notice, by the way, that we seem to be speaking in order of declining age. I suppose this is something that Eric arranged with malice aforethought. János, to begin with, I bring you greetings from 130 Mount Auburn Street, University Green, where you lived for quite a few years. As you remember, it's unassisted living for retired Harvard and MIT professors. There are still some, not very many, but some who are alive and remember you. You also know that I went over to the dark side about 45 years ago, and so I can no longer speak as a professional economist. But I want to say a few words to you, my young friend, and give you some wisdom, suggesting some wisdom on being 90. I, not too long ago, had a 90th birthday, and I made 2 observations at that time. I think actually probably Ben Friedman heard me make these before. One, I said that being 90 is not so bad, except when walking and trying to get up from a chair. And also, in order to become 90, you need 2 things. You need good genes and a good doctor. Now, in fact, the quality of genes is very hard to establish for anybody who was Jewish and who survived the Holocaust, as both János and Zsuzsa did. It affected life expectancy in very major ways. As far as a good doctor, I told the story that I said to my doctor, as I get older, I drink more. And he said to me, that's exactly what I want you to do. And then I realized that he was talking about water, and I was talking about scotch. So do keep these lessons in mind. Now, as I said, my days as a practicing economist were over a long time ago, but I do remember very well how in the late 70s and early 80s, the world of modern economics started to listen to a new voice, a voice that educated us and improved our understanding of Eastern Europe, and in fact much larger than that, and also improved our understanding of our own society. And as you noted in your remarks, it was not easy to get a great many people interested here. I remember that very well. I also remember Zusha making palachinta, and that was also a very good memory to come away with. And so I wish you a very happy birthday and many more years of a good and active life.
I'm the only non-economist here. Yeah, I'm not? Okay. And I'm afraid to say that, I mean, I'm not afraid to say that not much rubbed off on me of the economics, but I've enjoyed all the wonderful people who have been involved in it. I can't believe you're 90, János, and I can't believe I'm 86. Ken Galbraith said when anybody is talking about an advanced age, and he said this at his great age, he doesn't want anybody to say, still. Are you still? Are you still this? And are you still that? When Eric invited me, I looked over two of the books that János gave me, one in Hungarian and its translation, which he wanted me to read, Contradictions and Dilemmas, which you all know, I'm sure. He gave me the Hungarian version because I was interested in the drawings that were made for the book. And those original drawings hung in his house here in Cambridge, but they were reproduced only in the Hungarian version, so he gave me the Hungarian version to see the drawings, but I read the English version. And the names that he wrote under the drawings, number one, bureaucracy instead of going forward. And the drawings illustrated those ideas. Number two, paternalistic system. Number three, exploiting Big Daddy. Number four, maze of the system. And number five, how to beat the system, finding loopholes. That was my favorite drawing. János suggested I read the last chapter of the book, an analogy between medicine and economics. It is brilliant, and it really took someone with a deep sense of humor to write it. He took it very seriously, and yet there is some basic humor in the thing, which I very much enjoyed with my limited economics knowledge. Outside of economics, as Bob mentioned, he had also email exchanges with János about the worsening political situation in Hungary. His having gone through so much fascism, he and especially Zusha, it's tragic that it affects them so deeply. I will say that János's personality leaves a strong, warm impression, as does Zusha's, and I think of her always when I make, as Henry mentioned also, she made the recipe for gravlax. She taught me how to make gravlax, and every time I make it, I think of Zusha. Happy birthday, János, and love to you both.
Amartya Sen very much wanted to be here today, but because of illness, he couldn't. But he sent a very brief note to be read. János, I will be prevented from coming to the meeting tomorrow morning. I am very sorry about this, but I want to convey my unbounded admiration and warmest affection for you and Zsuzsa. Many thanks, Amartya.
János, happy birthday. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish we were all here together, but I hope this is an adequate substitute, or a substitute in any case. You are louder. You are certainly one of the most admirable people of our times. I think of you as the anti-Forrest Gump. You've not only been there at all kinds of happenings and I don't have to say, many of them you, of course, did not wish to be at, but you've not been a bystander. You've been a participant. You've tried to make things better in Hungary and to make things better in the world. And we still need you. We need your voice. It's needed in Hungary and it's needed in the United States. Your message to us, I want to speak to one point you made in that, which was the comparison between the process of academic appointments that you were part of in this country, in this department, and the process that you were part of in your own country, or not part of, actually. That's the problem. I remembered, and I've thought about it often, when you made that comment, the same comment to me, after I kind of complained at one point about our own process and the lack of diversity in our candidates and in our deliberations. And you kind of gently rebuked me by making this comment that, in effect, at least we make the decisions, and these are not decisions we, the department, we, the professors, and these are not decisions that are foisted upon us by a bureaucracy, by an autocracy. And at that time, that seemed like such a alien thought that it's no longer an alien thought. We're not, as you have pointed out, I think you're right, we have a resilient democratic culture, but we can't take it for granted, and that's something that I've come to think about in your very apt comment at now probably 30 years ago. But however important it was for the times, it's even more important now. And it's a difference that I've come to appreciate more, not only as I've got older, but as I've lived through these changes that we have all lived through in the last couple of years, and that you've been living through in an even more acute form in Hungary. We need your voice, János, and we'll need it for as long as you have the strength to contribute to the debate and to contribute to the defense of common values. So best wishes to you on your 90th birthday. Love to you and Zsuzsa, and keep up the struggle. Thank you.
János, good morning. It's a privilege to be able to salute you, not just because of your birthday, but because of who you are and what you have done and what you continue to do. I'd like to associate myself very much with what everyone else has said about the strength of your intellectual accomplishments, but that's not what I want to speak about this morning. I'd like to say something about the impact that you had on me during the years when we were colleagues. I separate that into two dimensions, one moral and one intellectual. I'm often impressed by what I normally think of as individuals' strength of purpose. And I observe that in many people. I sometimes observe that people don't have that. But you, to me, with my sheltered background, brought something else to it, because I've been fortunate to live in a world in which normally when I think of people as having strength of purpose, it doesn't necessarily require courage. I've been lucky. I live in a world, and have always lived in a world, in which that's not necessary. But you exemplified to me the notion that sometimes, in other circumstances, strength of individual purpose requires more, and what it required for you and what you therefore represented and still represent to me is a kind of courage to maintain one's strength of purpose against not just obstacles, but personal threats of the kind that in my existence I've never known, and hope that I and the people with whom I live and members of my family never know. And it made an impact on me to think about what you have done and the circumstances under which you've done it. And I've always admired you for that, and I still do, and I always will. Second, I'd like to say something about your intellectual impact on me, and I'm going to refer to two separate conversations that you and I had when I was just beginning the work that led to what I'm guessing will be remembered as my most influential book, one that came out a decade or so ago. First, this is the book on economic growth. When I began that project, I wasn't particularly distinguishing between writing a book on economic growth and writing a book on capitalism. And the reason was that it didn't cross my mind, still doesn't, to be honest, that there is any system capable of generating economic growth other than capitalism. And therefore, whether I was writing on economic growth or writing on capitalism was not a distinction that had fully penetrated my thinking. You and I had a conversation, as I recall. This was sitting at your apartment over on Mount Auburn Street, in which you steered me to one of your books. I brought it along this morning, the one on socialism. And the advice that you gave me was that if I wanted to write a book on capitalism, I might think about what you had done in writing about socialism and think about whether that's what I really wanted to do. Well, I took your advice, and I thought about that question for a while, and then I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. Sometimes I find clarifying I wasn't your student, but I was your younger colleague, and I was listening very carefully. In my own experience, I find that sometimes clarifying for a student what he or she doesn't want a piece of work to be about is just as important as clarifying what it's supposed to be about. And so the work took a different direction, and it became unambiguously about economic growth or the lack thereof. But I think in looking back, that was very much a part of your influence on me and on that work. Second, I'd like to read to you the final paragraph of the preface to that work, because I refer to you. I don't know if you've ever seen that preface, but I refer to you, although not by name, Steve Marglin asked me just the other day whether it was you to whom I was referring, and the answer was yes, of course. But I'll read you the final paragraph of this preface. And of course, this is following at the end of some other statements, and of course, I have written also from the perspective of my time and place. One of my Harvard colleagues, with whom I once discussed in some detail the hypothesis about economic growth and moral progress that I advance here, a distinguished European scholar, a decade and a half older than I. As I'm reading this to you, János, I have a vivid memory of sitting in your apartment on Mount Auburn Street and the conversation that we were having. One of my Harvard colleagues, with whom I once discussed in some detail the hypothesis about economic growth and moral progress that I advance here, a distinguished European scholar, a decade and a half older than I, this is you, commented that only an American, and at that only an American of my generation, would write a book expressing such an optimistic perspective, etc., etc., etc. What you said obviously made an impression on me, János, because I quoted it in the place where I quoted what you said. And in the perhaps 15 years since you had that conversation, what you said to me then has made even more of an impression. I think you're right, and I think comparing the circumstances in which you have lived and made such an enormous contribution, what required the courage that I referred to a moment ago, to the no other word than blessed circumstances in which my generation of Americans have had the good fortune to live, is contemplating that difference is a broadening and deepening experience. I thank you, János, not only for what you have done for our profession and what you have done for your country, but for what you have done in helping my thinking during the years in which we were colleagues. Thank you and happy birthday. Good luck, good fortune.
Larry Summers was planning to be here, but he came down with the flu yesterday. And so he asked me to read a statement, which I will do. János, I wish I could be with you as you celebrate your 90th birthday. More than I have ever had a chance to express to you, you have been a model for me of an engaged scholar. You have made profound contributions to understanding the way in which different economic systems do or do not cohere. I find myself frequently referring to soft budget constraints. But for you, scholarship seemed always both an end in itself and a means to a better world. Every time I heard you speak after 1989, I was struck by the sophistication of your understanding of the internal dynamics of communism. The rest of us always seemed naive next to you. If not everything we hoped for after the Berlin Wall fell has happened, not everything we feared has happened either. For this you deserve much credit. Be proud of all you have contributed. Be proud also of the example you set as a global cosmopolitan. It's been an inspiration to me and many others. With admiration, Larry. And now we're going to have a video greeting from Philipe Aghion, who is in Paris.
János, I wanted just to wish you a very happy 90th birthday. I'm sorry I cannot be in Budapest this week, but I will be with you next month to hug you for your 90th birthday. This is a great event, and as you know, you've been probably the closest person to me as a colleague, because there are many things we share. I came to, like you, I came to economics from politics. I wanted to change the world and to contribute to changing the world. And so that's what brought me to economics, is the political motivation. Also, like you, initially, I believed that the centrally planned system, that socialism, was a better system than capitalism. That capitalism, you had unemployment, inflation, war, that you didn't have in the central, that in principle you should not have in the centrally planned system. But then I understood that there was a big difference between the two systems, is that there is freedom in the market system, and that freedom is key to innovation, and innovation is key to economic growth. And that's why growth is driven by market system. And whereas the socialist system, except maybe in defense, in some areas, could not generate innovations. And so the whole question was to how can we reconcile this power that the market system has to generate innovation and growth with with a more equitable society. How could we generate inclusive growth? And so I think that's a concern that we shared, and so that's very much we thought about the transition. How could we do the transition from socialist economy to market-based system? How could we use the experience of transition economies to better understand comparative systems and the relationship between growth and institutions? We started together the journal Economics of Transition. My work with Olivier Blanchard on the speed of transition was very much inspired by your work. And we've been talking a lot about transition issues, but beyond that, about innovation. And now, recently, about how to reconcile innovation with social mobility. And there is this whole issue of inequality and growth. And there again, very close. We know that there are several ways to measure inequality. You have top income share, you have the Gini, you have social mobility. They are not equivalent. And we also know that there are several drivers of top income inequality. There are, of course, entry barriers, but there are also innovation is also a driver. And those drivers do not have the same effects on growth and on social mobility. And so the relationship between growth and inequality, broad speaking, is a complex relationship. And I think on all those issues that are always key to our thinking, we always wanted to have, how to think of how to generate prosperity and to have prosperity synonymous of opportunities for all. And I think we always thought around parallel lines and coming from the same place. So that's why, I don't see you 90. I see you not older than me, at the same time being my role model. And although I'm also getting older. János, it's a great, it's for me a very important event, your 90th birthday. And I can't wait to be in Budapest to celebrate it with you. So happy birthday, János.
János and Zsuzsa. My talk was directed not at you, you know what you wrote, but at my colleagues. So I now want to say something personal. Boldog születésnap neked, Zsuzsának. Nagyon hiányzol nekünk. Szervusz.
When János joined the Harvard Economics Department in 1986, he suggested to me that it might be useful if we got together occasionally to talk economics. His thinking was that he had some important ideas about centrally planned economies, such as the soft budget constraint, the shortage economy, and I knew something about modern economic theory. So perhaps I could help him formulate these ideas in a way that would make them accessible to, or more accessible to mainstream economists. The problem was that we were both so busy, it proved difficult to find a time to actually meet. So after the third or fourth round of back and forth, no, Tuesday the 12th won't work, I can't do it on Friday the 16th, I was tempted to say, how about never? Will never work? But I'm glad I didn't, because eventually we did get together, and I soon got completely hooked on his concepts. And in fact, eventually Matthias Duatripon and I developed a formal model of the soft budget constraint, which turns out to be a paper that I'm especially proud of. And I don't think that would have happened hadn't it been for our conversations in Harvard Square. I'm also very proud of the PhD students that János and I jointly supervised. Interestingly, they were all Chinese. Yingyi Chen, Chonggang Xu, Daoqui Li. These students were deeply committed to understanding the remarkable path that the Chinese economy has been taking since the reforms that Deng Xiaoping instituted in the late 70s. The students relied on János for his unsurpassed expertise on how state-directed economies work, and on me for some theoretical tools. Now, all this was long ago. János and Zsuzsa left Cambridge and the U.S. in the early 2000s, and we've been missing them. So I was delighted when, as Philipe Aghion mentioned, some of János's Hungarian friends decided to organize a birthday conference in Budapest in his honor, and you better believe that I will be there. So János, let me wish you a very happy birthday by video for now, but let's you and I and Zsuzsa celebrate in person next month in Budapest. Thank you all for participating this morning. Happy birthday, János.